What are your night shift horror stories? Worked a parking garage at the airport, cleaning the top deck, and noticed about 100 ravens all over a truck with a tarp over the bed. Took my flashlight expecting something awful. Noticed as I got closer the smell and the ravens taking turns going in a hole they had torn open and popping out covered in gunk. Some guy left a broke down beater with a couple animal carcasses in the back to rot. No heads. Checked the logs and the damn truck had been there since November, and it was April. So everything was just thawing and breaking down. Not mine, but I used to work at a small hotel and the manager there told me a terrifying night shift story. It was about midnight when she got a call at the front desk from a man. He said that he's with his 8-year-old daughter who dances competitively and needed advice on what she should wear. She gave him some basic fashion advice. He asked my manager, what about fishnet leggings? Do you think those are too sexy? Then proceeds to talk in graphic detail about how he thinks his own daughter has been trying to seduce him for weeks and how he's starting to enjoy seeing her dance in these cute outfits. Meanwhile, my manager is looking through a computer system trying to figure out who this man is so she can call the cops. However, the room he was reportedly in was empty. The man ends up hanging the phone up before she could find out where he was truly calling from. A couple months later at around 11 PM my manager answers a desk phone. A familiar voice asked her if she could help him pick out an outfit for his daughter's next dance recital. She asked him, let me guess you want to know if she should wear fishnet leggings. The man immediately hangs up the phone. I used to work night shift as a care aide in an old folks home. It was already creepy. The home was an old hospital that was converted. Some asshole kept walking around the courtyard after dark dressed as the Grim Reaper knocking on doors. It was actually really scary. He ran off, and the facility got a security guard for a few weeks. Warning. Medical gross stuff incoming. I worked in an emergency room. The worst night that comes to mind involves a patient that was bitten by a baby timber rattlesnake. He was bleeding out of every single orifice by the time he got to us. More blood than I'd ever seen before outside of a motorcycle vs 75 mph head first to asphalt. I don't remember how many doses of Crawford we gave him, but it was the hospital's entire supply. But trying to get him stabilized, arranging the helicopter transport to a bigger and better equipped facility. All the blood. Those weren't the worst parts. The worst part was when the patient lost control of his bowels. I will never, ever forget that smell. I spent the entire time standing by the door with a battery powered fan and a handful of gauze pads saturated with cinnamon oil trying to reduce some of the smell. The doctor occasionally stuck her head out just so I could waft the cinnamon oil in her face. Yes, by some miracle, the patient did end up surviving. And as far as I know, he made a full recovery. But the blood, the smell, and just the shock of it all. Yeah. Never underestimate a baby timber rattlesnake. Oh man. I hate recalling this story. I work night shift at a rehab facility. We have a protected gate with a camera looking down from above, and one of those doorbell cameras in the office. The camera monitor is on one wall and the doorbell monitor is on another. I was doing some paperwork and see this guy walk past, stop for a few seconds, then slowly turned around, walked back and stared up at the camera, and he kept staring. The facility is in a rough neighborhood, so I'm fairly used to folks hanging out around the gate and usually ignore it. But the way he was staring was off-putting. Like, his eyes and expression were hollow and dead, almost as if he were in deep thought about something horrible. I was pretty sure he was zonked on synthetics. I used the intercom to see if he was okay, but he just kept staring directly at the camera. We have a rule. If it's not hurt or trying to come through the fence, just let it be. No sense in engaging needlessly with somebody potentially hostile or ducking with the locals. Y'all. He stood there and stared at that camera for 2 hours. That same dead-eyed expression staring right at me. I did a round and came back to find him gone, which only creeped me out more. Was an orderly in a hospital. 2 of us were sitting in the basement office adjacent to the morgue. A guy passed our office, looking at us a little shifty, came back again and asked if we had access to the morgue. We said yes, thinking he was doing a pickup for a funeral home. but that seemed strange given it was around 12 o'clock to 12:30 a.m. Nope. He wanted to pay us to let him in and leave him alone with the bodies for an hour. We escorted him up to security. Apparently he had tried it in the past, as security knew him. I worked in a residential treatment center for teen girls. One girl with some severe trauma, rape, abuse, came sleepwalking into the room screaming to please untie her while clawing at her wrists. She was begging me to help her because he's torturing me. I sat her down and pulled her bracelets and watch off. She went completely limp, then got up and went back to bed. It freaked me out seeing the raw emotion of her trauma, since she was always smiling and relatively calm during the day. Another time I was doing my nightly checks and a guy suddenly walked out from behind the door coming at me. I screamed and threw my flashlight at him. It was a smiley face balloon. Was running the register at 24-hour supermarket. Stock person comes running in to produce carrying mop handle screaming "You mother ducker." Out of sight. He keeps yelling "ducker" and smacking handle at something. For like 5 minutes. I'm ringing up customers and freaking out because he was losing his mind. But I'm not interested in getting involved in a murder, so I ignore it. Later I find out he was chasing a rat. Did hospital security for about 2 months. It was small hospital out in the sticks, so we were responsible for removing patients who had passed from their rooms and transferring into the morgue freezer. We had just brought a decedent to the morgue and, right before we were about to transfer them to the freezer, their cell phone rang. Granted, pretty tame compared to some stories, but at the time it gave us a decent fright. Leaving one night from work I was followed by a log truck, and it kept going faster and faster until I was at 100 miles per hour. I pulled off as the truck blew past my car, rocking it. Thing was, there was twisty turns ahead. Couldn't find the truck. Update. No, he wasn't experiencing brake failure. This was on an uphill, which the route is slow and progressively uphill. I'm not on the Grapevine or 4th of July pass. It was just hauling ass. They were running bobtail. Usually if a truck loses brakes, the driver would probably engage engine brakes and downshift. Many years ago I briefly had a job that started at 3:30 a.m. The job itself was very boring, but the commute was wild. The world is at its weirdest in the very early morning. Road hazards haven't been called in yet. So one day I pulled off the freeway and discovered that the off-ramp was completely flooded. Deep enough that I have no idea how my car didn't stall. But the most interesting discovery was that if law enforcement has to raid a home, they do it around 3 or 4 in the morning, because that's the best chance of everyone being peacefully asleep. One day I was nearly to work when I noticed something off ahead of me. I slowed down and came up to a massive police blockade. Squad cars everywhere and absolutely crawling with heavily armed officers, but all in absolute silence. They silently waved me down a side street. Just a creepy, unsettling experience. More of a very weird event. Sometimes work night shifts. One time was going home around 4 a.m. or so. It was pitch dark outside and very quiet. Person on a bike came out of nowhere. Said he remembered me from middle school. Even said the right school name. And rode off. Work in the winter for me is plowing and snow removal. It was late, and I had been out for over 24 hours at this point. Pulled over into a small cul-de-sac with the nearest house being over 100 yards away, so I could let the truck stay on, so I could stay warm. 6-wheel Mack things loud. As I'm nodding off, there was a very loud bang, and it felt like someone then pulled on my driver's side door handle. Luckily I always lock my truck doors. I immediately threw on every strobe/rear/headlight and started looking around, and I saw absolutely nothing. It scared the shit out of me. Needless to say, I never sleep anywhere other than lit parking lots now. Worked at a distress center almost 10 years ago. Was on the 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift. Got about 2 phone calls each hour of the shift from the same guy saying that has tied up in a room. His balls are tied up with leather straps, and his wife is getting banged by 5 giant black guys in the other room. Asked him each time if has in distress, and he says no every time. Kept telling him if has not in distress then he shouldn't be calling, and let him go. I just can't believe he was up from 12 to 6 a.m. to make those calls. Worked for a phone company in a call center a few years ago. There was a famous customer called the cigarette creep. He would call at late hours. Whenever he got in line with a male, he would instantly drop it and call again. When it was a female, he would introduce himself like a normal person and ask for random information about our services. Before the person started their response, he would then ask, "May I light a cigarette?" and then would masturbate while they talk. That's what people assume. Which is probably right, since he would take care not to overstep and give enough reason for us to finish the call. But he would sometimes groan and say dirty stuff. This didn't become a horror story until recently, but as a teen, I used to close down the gas station / truck stop I worked at alone. My boss used to pop up out of the shadows as I was closing down the till with the backup lights on. He'd be super calm and act like it wasn't creepy at 11 PM when he should be home with his family. He was even at my high school graduation. He and his wife's number's still in my phone. Anyhow, he is currently on trial for murdering a prostitute via stabbing her to death. Back in '94. Cold case potentially solved via DNA and modern science. Worked as an evening manager at a major Hilton property. Got a complaint from a bunch of guests about the noise coming from one of the rooms. Turns out, a drunken man was beating the shit out of his wife and had the door barricaded so we couldn't get in. I called the cops and they had to get into the room using the balcony from the room next room over. I'm still traumatized by what I saw when they finally arrested him and got the wife out of the room. She was covered in blood. It was horrifying. Oh shit. I was working in the restaurant / room service at a Hilton in College Inn. While no one actually saw what happened, my manager told me he saw the inside of the room and it was covered in blood. Like on the bed, on the carpet, in the bathroom, on the walls, etc. The guy told my manager his wife got a nosebleed. Saw all kinds of crazy shit working room service at the Hilton. Used to work night shift at a 24-hour Walmart. Customers are nuts enough in the daytime, but they become weird after midnight. Once had an elderly guy come in wearing only a jean jacket and fishnet stockings. He came up to my register, leaned in, and asked if we carried anything to get rid of lice. Those plastic barriers all stores have now to protect cashiers. They need to keep those even after the pandemic ends. I lost count of the times customers got into my personal space to ask about products for fleas, lice, rashes, etc. I was once staying late doing some scenic painting in a college campus theater. It was late, pitch black dark outside and very quiet in the building. A few of us were up on the stage, not really talking, just taking care of business when suddenly I saw out of the corner of my eye something go very quickly by the open door to the lobby. WTF. Then it went by again, and I actually saw what it was. A guy with long hair, wearing pajamas, and no socks or shoes. He was tiptoeing in a very exaggerated way, pulling his knees up very high, and grinning. WTF! Exclamation mark. It sounds kinda funny, but it was creepy as hell. We all made eye contact, and one of the other painters was just about to go shut the door when the dude walked right in. He stood there staring at us for a full minute. You could have heard a pin drop. He threw his arms out to the sides dramatically and said, "I'm your savior, Jesus Christ." No one responded and he eventually walked out. I guess he was hoping to get more of a reaction. The door was promptly shut and locked behind him and security called. They were not impressed. Turns out that he was a patient at some sort of group home nearby and had done this multiple times. I still get creeped out to this day if I'm working in a theater at night though. Was walking through the simulation lab for nursing students at the hospital I work at on very little sleep. All the lights were off and it was my first time working night shift. Turned a corner and saw what I thought was a person standing behind a lamp that was on. Turns out it was a mannequin holding the pull cord. Really freaked me out, and I was awake after that. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.